Gasoline is back above $4.50 before summer, and for millions of drivers, that number is more than a price on a sign. For many American households, gasoline is not just another price moving through the economy. It is the cost of getting to work, taking children to school, running errands, visiting family, keeping a small business operating, and making summer travel possible. Before the summer driving season, that cost was rising again. As of May 16, 2026, AA listed the national average for regular gasoline at $4.51.7 per gallon. Earlier in May, reported that the national average had reached $4.55 per gallon after rising 25 cents for the second straight week. Gasoline was back above $4.50 before peak summer travel had fully arrived. That is the number drivers see first, but the price on the sign is only the final result of a larger system. Behind it are crude oil prices, refinery operations, gasoline inventories, exports, seasonal travel demand, and regional supply conditions. When several of those forces move together, the impact can reach households quickly. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that gasoline prices rose 5.4% in April 2026. Over the previous 12 months, the gasoline index was up 28.4%. The broader energy index rose 17.9% over the same period. Those figures matter because gasoline is not optional for many families. It sits beside groceries, rent, mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, transportation, and debt inside the monthly budget. When gasoline rises, many households have little room to avoid the increase. A commuter still has to get to work. A parent still has to make the same weekly trips. A small business still has to cover service calls, deliveries, and transportation. The issue is not limited to energy markets. It is about how energy pressure reaches ordinary people. In May 2026, the immediate headline was clear. Gasoline prices were rising sharply before summer. On May 7th, AA reported that the national average had increased 25 cents for the second consecutive week, reaching $4.55 per gallon. AA also said pump prices were $1.40 higher than a year earlier. That year-over-year increase shows that drivers were not only reacting to a short-term weekly move, they were paying much more than they had the previous year. For a household that fills the tank every week, that difference can become a real monthly cost. For a family with 2 vehicles, a long commute, or summer travel plans, the pressure becomes harder to ignore. Government inflation data showed the same pattern. The April 2026 Consumer Price Index showed gasoline up 5.4% for the month and 28.4% over the year. Energy prices overall were up 17.9% from a year earlier. Gasoline was not the only source of pressure on household budgets, but it was a major part of the cost of living picture. The fuel supply system explains why. Gasoline does not move directly from crude oil to a gas station. Crude oil has to be produced or imported, transported, refined, stored, distributed, and sold. Each step can affect the final price. The Energy Information Administration has stated that crude oil is the largest factor in U.S. retail gasoline prices. Over the previous 10 years, crude oil accounted for slightly more than half of the retail average gasoline price. When crude oil prices are elevated, pump prices are usually under pressure as well. AA said gasoline prices remained elevated while crude oil prices were hovering in the $100 per barrel range. Also linked upward price pressure to global supply concerns, including negotiations around reopening the Strait of Hormuz. For most drivers, those details feel distant. They are not tracking crude oil markets or global shipping routes when they stop for gas, but the connection still matters. If crude oil is expensive, the raw material used to make gasoline is expensive. That cost can move through refining, distribution, and retail pricing before it reaches the pump. Crude oil, however, is only one part of the story. Supply is another. For the week ending May 8, 2026, EIA data reported by Reuters showed U.S. gasoline inventories falling by 4.1 million barrels to 215.7 million barrels. Inventories matter because they act as a cushion. When inventories are stronger, the market has more supply available to absorb demand, refinery issues, export movements, or regional disruptions. When inventories fall, that cushion becomes thinner. The drawdown happened while refinery utilization rose to 91.7%. That detail makes the situation more nuanced. The data does not show refineries sitting idle. It shows refineries running at a high utilization rate while gasoline stocks still declined. For drivers, the meaning is straightforward. The system was working hard, but the supply cushion was still tightening. That is different from a single refinery problem or a short-term price spike. It points to a market where demand, exports, refinery activity, and inventory levels were all contributing to pressure ahead of summer. Reuters reported gasoline consumption at 8.75 million barrels per day during the same week. It also reported that gasoline exports rose by 192,000 barrels per day to 1.05 million barrels per day. Those numbers do not prove that exports alone pushed prices higher. They show that domestic gasoline inventories were moving within a market where fuel was flowing through several channels at once. For households, those supply details do not appear directly on the credit card statement. What appears is the cost of filling the tank. But the supply picture helps explain why prices can rise even when refineries are running hard. The timing adds another layer. Gasoline prices were climbing in May, just before the summer driving season. That is when road travel becomes more important and when inventories, refinery performance, and demand receive closer attention. If inventories are already low before peak travel, the market has less room for disruption. If refineries are already operating at high utilization, there may be less easy capacity to add supply quickly. If crude oil remains expensive, the starting cost remains elevated. None of this guarantees a specific future price. It does not mean gasoline must reach $5 nationally. It does not mean every region will face the same pressure. It does explain why gasoline above $4.50 before summer is more than a routine seasonal headline. Several parts of the fuel system were already under strain. Analysts quoted by Reuters pointed to that risk. Bob Yager of Mesaho said the market could catch the all-time high of $5 a gallon for gasoline again. Giovanni Stanovo of UBS said U.S. gasoline inventories would start from a low level in the upcoming U.S. driving season. Those are warnings, not guarantees. They need to be treated carefully. Their importance is that they connect the current price with the condition of the market behind it. The concern is not simply that gasoline is expensive today. It is that the supply cushion entering summer may be thinner than drivers would want. EIA had also identified a structural issue earlier in the year. In January 2026, EIA said decreasing U.S. refinery capacity could offset some of the effects of lower crude oil prices, especially on the West Coast. That is a longer-term concern. Refinery capacity determines how much crude oil can be turned into finished products such as gasoline. If capacity falls, some regions may become more exposed to supply tightness even when crude prices move lower. For consumers, refinery capacity is usually invisible until it affects price or availability. A refinery decision looks like an industry issue. Over time, however, capacity changes can reach drivers through regional supply, fuel margins, and pump prices. That is the pattern running through this story. An energy market change becomes a refinery and inventory issue. A refinery and inventory issue becomes a supply cushion problem. A thinner supply cushion becomes price pressure. Price pressure becomes a household budget problem. The data shows that chain in several ways. Gasoline prices rose 5.4% in April. That means fuel costs were rising quickly during the month. For commuters and families, it meant less room in the budget for other expenses. Gasoline was up 28.4% over the previous year. That means drivers were paying in a much higher price environment than 1 year earlier. For households, it turned a recurring expense into a larger recurring burden. Inventories fell by 4.1 million barrels. That means the available gasoline cushion became smaller. For drivers, it could mean greater exposure to price pressure if demand stays strong or supply tightens further. Refinery utilization reached 91.7%. That means refineries were already operating at a high level. If inventories continue to fall, the system may have less simple room to increase output. Crude oil accounted for slightly more than half of the retail average gasoline price over the previous decade. That means pump prices remain heavily tied to crude markets. For families, global oil movements can affect a local gas station price, even when the family has no direct connection to the energy industry. This is why gasoline prices matter beyond the gas station. Fuel is tied to mobility. Mobility is tied to work. Work is tied to income. And income determines how well a household can keep up with everything else. For a middle-class family, gasoline is part of a larger cost stack. It comes alongside rent or mortgage payments, groceries, electricity, insurance, car payments, repairs, and debt. When one category rises, the budget tightens. When several categories rise together, the pressure becomes harder to manage. Gasoline is especially difficult because many households cannot easily reduce it. A family can postpone a vacation, eat out less often, or delay a purchase. A worker with a fixed commute may still need the same amount of fuel every week. That is why the pump price has such a strong effect. It is visible. It changes often, and it tells drivers immediately whether one part of their budget is becoming harder to manage. Small businesses face similar pressure. A service company, delivery business, contractor, or mobile repair operation may depend on daily driving. When fuel costs rise, the cost of doing business rises with it. Some businesses absorb that increase. Others pass part of it on through higher prices. Either way, the pressure does not remain isolated at the pump. For truckers and freight-related businesses, diesel is the more central fuel. But higher energy prices can still signal broader transportation pressure. Energy markets affect movement, logistics, and the cost of keeping goods moving through the economy. For summer travelers, the timing matters, as data showed prices above $4.50 before peak travel. Families planning road trips were facing higher fuel costs before many summer trips had even started. A higher pump price may not cancel every trip, but it can change the budget. It can reduce spending elsewhere. It can make a vacation more expensive before lodging, food, and other travel costs are counted. The economic consequence is practical. More money spent at the pump means less money available somewhere else. As of May 16, 2026, the current picture was clear. AA listed regular gasoline at $4.51.7 per gallon. BLS showed gasoline rising sharply in April and up 28.4% from a year earlier, EIA. Data reported by Reuters showed gasoline inventories falling to 215.7 million barrels, while refinery utilization rose to 91.7%. Those facts do not prove that prices will continue rising. They do not prove that gasoline will return to the all-time national peak. They do not prove that every region will experience the same outcome. They do show why the issue deserves attention. Gasoline prices were not rising in isolation. They were rising while crude oil was expensive, inventories were falling, refineries were running hard, exports were part of the supply picture, and summer demand was approaching. For drivers, that combination matters more than any single data point. It means the cost of mobility was becoming more expensive at the same time millions of Americans were preparing to drive more. The pressure can still change as new inventory reports, refinery data, crude prices, and travel demand come in. Gasoline prices move quickly, and the numbers need to be checked often, but the broader lesson is already visible. The price at the pump is the final signal from a much larger system. When crude oil, refinery capacity, inventories, exports, and seasonal demand move in the wrong direction, the result appears in one of the most visible places in American life: a gas station sign. For households already balancing groceries, housing, utilities, insurance, transportation, and debt, that sign is more than a market update. It is a reminder that the systems behind everyday costs can reach the family budget faster than many people expect.